Start it over.
In 5. Hello all, and welcome to Essence of Wonder. We have had some technical issues, so we had to restart, but you don't know that because you're watching on YouTube a year from now, and that's okay. But I'm really excited to be here today because we have a special show on ransomware negotiations. We don't usually do shows like that, but honestly, I'm really excited. It's not every day that people who are in the depth of talking to these criminals or trying to do these incident response kind of things agree to talk with us. And I would say even more than that, that just by saying ransomware, we're already touching on some things that people disagree on. Paying the criminals, what do you mean? You can't engage with them, but on the other hand, you do want your business to operate. We have experts here. They agree to talk to us, and I'm truly thankful for that. Karen, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Gadi. How are you?
I am happy that I have my backup thing whenever we're doing something on Zoom. That's all I got to say. And I'm glad that we have a... Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm excited for this conversation just because you don't negotiate with criminals sounds like the sort of aphorism that suits you just fine up until you find your data being held by criminals, at which point you really wish that there was someone who had specialized in what to do in this situation. And I'm so excited to hear about the reality of what you do.
There is a show I like from the 80s called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. It's 2 different shows, same people. And in one of them, the minister was under threat of assassination. So all of a sudden, listening to people's phones was okay. But then the threat was removed because it wasn't important enough. And his assistant didn't understand. He said, antenna, understand the political situation has changed. But yes, it doesn't make any theoretical sense in security to negotiate with these people. But on the other hand, when you're on the ground and you have nothing else to do and people are afraid for their jobs and even their banks could have been compromised, their information, what do? And that's when it comes to, we need to negotiate with these people. We need to understand they will do what they promise. We need to understand that if we pay them, they can actually do what they promises in the technology is good enough. We need to do a lot of different things. So let's just skip in and start the actual show. We have 3 wonderful people joining us today. First is Christoph. I know Christoph now for quite a few years, maybe 20, 30. He took me on as a friend when I was young and disruptive. Well, I'm still young and disruptive in the industry, I suppose. Maybe not so young. And he has a lot of stories about me eating hummus, and he recorded me singing in the mountains of Jerusalem, and he embarrassed me in front of 300 people at Microsoft when I organized the conference there for security operations. So I love him. He also runs one of the best incident response companies in the world you never heard of. They are under the radar. They never try to market themselves. I'm sorry, Christoph. But in Europe, if you want incident response, you have heard of BFK. Hi, Christoph.
Hi, Gadi. How are you?
I am good. I am good. Of course, if you want to say something more about yourself, feel more than free to.
Well, I'm in this field for quite a long time. I have...
Okay, thank you, Christoph. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go ahead. I just have to troll you. You're German.
I've been in this field for a long time.
You're sweet. You're nice. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
It was in 78, and I stayed the whole time in this field. And the company is 30 years in this business, so I've seen a lot of that stuff.
Well, I think it's also 30 years right now. I remember a story you told me once about Iranians coming to you in the 70s and asking you if you're selling GPS, or it was the 80s, I don't know, GPS trackers or whatever it was. But you've been around. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Second, I would like to introduce Moty. Moty Cristal is the person I go to learn about negotiations. He is not only a security person, he truly is a negotiator, and his courses are mind-blowing. I thought I knew about negotiations and how they run until I met him. And more than that, he has saved people so much money. I mean, we'll talk about it in a minute, but some of the people here have reduced the amount of money you need to pay from millions to 15,000, for example. Not even mentioning the actual facts of continuing to work. So Moty, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Gadi. I really liked your start with Karen about associating our topic with negotiating with terrorists, because many people ask me, is it true that we should not negotiate with terrorists, right? And, I said what a friend of mine, Chris Voss, told me many, many years about, we Americans, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we negotiate against terrorists. So we will, I will try to shed some light about the dynamics of how actually to deal with this cyber criminals, with the bad guys. In my background, as you mentioned, I'm a negotiator. I run a boutique consulting firm which supports senior executives and government officials all over the world in complex negotiations. And in the last 6 or 7 years, I've been heavily engaged with this cyber crisis following my intensive work as a hostage negotiator in many things, which of course I cannot share within our security forces. So thanks, Gadi, for the opportunity.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming in. And
Moty,
a matter of fact,
could I ask what what is on your shirt? I'm so curious. I can see the top of 3 people's heads.
Oh, that's my favorite TV series, Money Heist, Casa de Papel. I really like this show because it's actually not the essence of wonder, but rather the essence of human dynamic and the capability of the professor who runs this show to really understand the mind and read the steps of the police officers, etc. I'm really a big fan of Money Heist, and I use it intensively in my courses, episodes, and to show Money Heist, Casa de Papel.
Thank you very much. Like, recommendation taken.
Oh, definitely.
we like recommendations, don't we? Okay, and moving on, Zach Hinkle, right? Zachary, I suppose. We have been on the same mailing lists and organizations of information sharing and so on for a long, long time. I don't think we ever actually spoke, but we might have. Too many people at conferences. And when I announced this show a couple of days ago to a specific group, after asking the moderator for permission, he said, well, you know, I actually do this and that. Here are a couple of questions you might be interested in. I said, well, how about you join the show, sir? And he said yes last minute, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I don't know to introduce you beyond that. I did Google you, but I figured you can help me out and say something about yourself, because I understand you wear many hats.
Yes, first off, I appreciate you inviting me to the show, and
you appreciate me, not just inviting you to the show, just to be clear.
Well, and let's be honest, our first communication was, here's a set of questions that you can kind of ask your panelists to kind of get them uneasy in their seats, and some of the things that, especially in the states that we're facing, with the
and you were just smart enough to join me when your recommendation to me was to make my panelists uneasy in their seats.
Yeah, I guess I kind of set myself up on that one, but no, it's an interesting, it's obviously a serious problem. I've co-founded a startup that has been doing well in this space because of the fact that the complexities dealing with it, not only the payment, but once you start looking at Treasury guidance and FinCEN and how this is taking off. So we're it's kind of a white glove boutique service that handles this, name reliant security, and we usually deal with a little bit bigger clients that are looking to pay probably about 30 to almost $100 million in their ransoms. So that's how we kind of got started. And then, yeah, in a little bit, we can talk more about that guidance on that payment and that recovery.
All right, then let's get started and get right into it. So just so everybody's warned, Zoom is very performative at times, and we're trying to fix that and have more of a regular conversation. And therefore, I'm going to try to be even more Israeli than usual and cut people off. So if you really want to say something and continue your thought, let me know. I will apologize in advance. So who's going to get us started?
I blame ADHD. Look,
you're right. I shouldn't blame Israel. I should blame myself. Gadi is like that. So you can blame ADHD. So let's just get started. Chris, what's been an incident recently where you had to negotiate, and how did it go?
Well, the most recent one was almost an incident for me. It was a clinic where we had to prepare for a payment, but then the actors actually gave the decryptor for free after they figured out they hadn't hit a university, which they thought they had hit university clinic. And so that was the most recent one. So, and luckily we didn't have to pay since they gave us the decryptor. But before I had several incidents. In 2020, it was a total of 6 incidents where we had to pay because nothing, absolutely nothing was left in data. It was a total sum of 6.5 million euros that had to be transferred. And it depends on the group that you have on the other side. The negotiation strategies are have to be adopting to the aggressor there, and most of the time you have had someone already talking to them, and that's very unfortunate because usually the IT department finds the ransom letter, contacts them and starts swearing at them, and that is not good for the further negotiations.
So I have a question about where as Gadi mentioned, I'm not a security professional, but I am the CTO of a startup and have been in that position a few times. So I would, I guess, be the immediate victim of something like this on a very bad day in my life. How do IT departments, generally react to this? Do they, is it the case that you're generally faced with, you can't get into your system, or do people sometimes say, oh, whatever, I've got a backup? How technical is it before it becomes a negotiation, I guess?
Your key indicator is whenever you start seeing LinkedIn profiles updating, whenever people start updating resumes, that's your indication of how concerned your IT staff is.
That's what we call an indicator of compromise, only not an IP address in this case, right? Moty.
No.
Yes, that is the case. Moty, let's get a little bit technical here. I'm an incident responder. There has been something come in here and I'm looking at it and it looks like a ghost, but no, oh no, it's a ransomware and my jokes suck. But then they decide, should we communicate with these people? What are the challenges? What are things they need to be aware of before communicating?
Well, I would argue that the best thing to do is, once you get the ransom note, to pick up the phone and call a professional negotiator, because my work as professional negotiator becomes significantly much more challenging, not to say harder, when when unprofessional, usually IT, but sometimes also management members or board members start actually to communicate with the cyber criminals, because communicating with the cyber criminals at the beginning of the communication has to be very general, very vague, definitely on one hand not hysteric, apologetic, in order not to increase their appetite in they actually have no other choice rather than paying. But on the other hand,
you're saying don't show weakness. Essentially, there is no win.
Exactly,
negotiations are always about.
Yeah. There's a very it's not actually a thin line, but there's a significant range of neutral reactions that on one hand are not aggressive, and definitely dealing with aggressive first responders is something that you see in the US, definitely in Israel, but sometimes also in Asia, that you do almost everything falling short of cursing the attackers. But I also saw some, first responders that said, actually, you don't have anything, don't threaten me, you're not in my system. And then of course, it intrigued the cyber criminals, first to cause more damage. Second, definitely today, with, I would say, tier 2 of the attack groups, to start very quickly or sooner they thought to publishing and to sell data, assuming they have a valuable data in their hands. So once you get the ransom note, make sure that your incident response team or whoever handles the event for you at the beginning has some experience, because we can identify or we can gather significant information which will be relevant for the handling of the crisis from the ransom note, from the identification of the threat actor, definitely sort them or categorize them, whether they are the Ivy League threat groups or second tier or third tier. Also depends on the amount of ransom and yeah, whatever. Gadi, you
makes sense. Well,
yeah.
there's a
ahead,
couple of questions.
Cut me. No, I'm Israeli.
I will be more rude to you later. Because you're Israeli, I'm actually not cutting you off for some reason. Not good on my end. But so we have a couple of questions coming in from the YouTube stream. Mark Seiden, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Mark. I'm sorry. But Mark is an awesome guy I love. I met him first at Yahoo when we ran ISOI there together, probably, 2006, 7? Anyway, he's asking about backups. Is backup a chip that you can use, leverage you can use, saying, we don't really need you to do this. It will just be easier. Is that something you would use, any of you?
Yeah, well, some companies do have a backup. There's always a little time frame of lost data, and they can decide whether they want to pay or not. But for the last 2 years, most of the gangs have adopted a second anchor. They basically steal data, and if the victim has enough backup to not pay, then they threaten the victim by publicizing that data. And from the incidents we had, I can clearly say these guys understand the language. So in my case, it was mostly German. So they understood which were the embarrassing or painful pieces of information they had stolen and started leaking them. One of the top-notch groups doing that is a Russian group around the CLOP, C-L-O-P malware. So the backup is helpful, but not in every case.
And I would jump in and say here, also reading the question coming in the chat, that one of the basic principles of any crisis negotiation is that negotiating or engaging with the criminals is not necessarily paying, not necessarily coming for an agreement. I am a big supporter of as early engagement as possible, mainly or in particular in order to gather information and to further support the IT guys or technological effort to identify at the beginning the scope of the event. And whether if you have a backup, as Christoph said, it might take time to restore for backup. So you can use the negotiation in order to buy time with the cyber criminals and not necessarily pay at the end. Of course, it has to be done very carefully, taking into consideration what Christoph mentioned about the recent practice or recent patterns of double ransomware, which means they ask you to pay for a decryption key and they ask you to pay for not revealing information or to not publish the data.
Yeah, and to kind of follow that up, so ransomware, especially ransomware as a service, the profit margin is insane. We've seen this year over year. I don't even believe any of us can keep up the statistics about the increase in ransomware usage, the increase in the average ransomware payment. And so when we start thinking about things like backup, just like Christoph and Moty talked about, is the return on this investment is now being broken down in multiple phases, whether it's initial access to your environment, and then they sell a backdoor to a secondary threat actor. So they make money there. They actually usually have that ransomware communicating to a C2 via that backdoor. So once you find it and close it, then the encryption starts, and you have to end up, paying to get decrypted. Yes, you could have backups, but really when it comes down to it, whenever you go to your general counsel, whenever you go to your leadership, and they're watching their stock price start plummeting, because I can tell you right now, the first thing, and Christoph mentioned this earlier, is once that ransomware C2 starts the encryption process, you're going to have data appear on that wall of shame. And when you appear on that wall of shame, media outlets find it, and they find it quick. And so how long can you sit as a main story on a news channel with your stock price before you got to get your company up and running? Whether that is just reputational damage, whether that is literally production lines that are shut down, a lot of it comes down to speed. And to be honest with you, I've been through exercises before where you try to shut down a full network, try to restore a full network. And a large enterprise, it's almost an impossible task. Maybe your switches rely on configurations that rely on your AD servers, and it becomes impossible to start bringing your network up in segments because you realize how much of your technology is interconnected. So then let's just say you decide, that you're going to go with backups. Then, just like Christoph said, once again, they've exfiltrated this data out of your network. Now they're going to say, okay, you either pay for this data, or we're going to put it on auction blocks and we're going to sell it off in segments or sell it to your competitors, so that way they get the information that we stole from you. Or DDoS, that's the big one now. It will just DDoS your company until you decide to pay this secondary amount. So the return on investment for these ransomware services is very high. That's why they keep growing. That's why we see them so much now, is because it just makes a lot of money. And so I really, suggest for most people, you got to flip that hat around. You got to turn around and say, okay, if I'm a ransomware or if I'm an attacker, how do I make the most money? How do I leverage all this? You see actually really good customer service. You see them really trying to help you restore your network after payment, because the fact that they know they have a lot on the line, their reputation means a lot to them as well.
I am curious, does that imply that when you, let's say you did interact with the ransomware folks and pay a whatever they're asking for, do they actually help you get your system back up and running?
Not only will they help you get your system up and running, it depends. It depends on how much you want them in there. They will try to notify you of any other backdoors or any other attackers they saw in your network. They'll, a lot of things that we talk about in the negotiations is talk to your incident response people. What was the initial attack vector? How did they move laterally through your network? Collect all those IOCs, because a lot of times they'll give them to you, so that way you can really kind of triage. Because the worst thing is you feel like you've got your network back on the ground, but they are asking you, you have an auditor asking you what information left, and you have no clue. So it's best to kind of ask that attacker up front to at least give you those breadcrumbs.
Okay. Well, it seems interesting that there are rules for these negotiations, but as professional negotiators who talk to these ransomware people, who pays you? Does cyber insurance cover ransomware negotiation nowadays? This is from Rhett.
Yeah. Cyber insurance covers today the professional services, the IT. Sometimes definitely they cover professional negotiators, and they cover sometimes media, relevant media support. Depends, of course, on your cyber insurance. And we usually recommend any companies which buy cyber insurance to at least meet the service providers that are either provided by the cyber insurance company or approved or authorized by the cyber insurance company. So if you can prepare and meet face-to-face with the service providers, IR, negotiators who will knock on the door when the crisis occurs, it is better for the company.
So do these criminals get better at this? Do they want to hire you at some point? I mean, have you ever encountered, what is the evolution of how these things work, and how does that interact with you as negotiators?
Zaki, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to go back, sorry, for that first question first, then we'll move forward, and say that he was correct that previously insurance companies cover the event, cover the negotiations, and your insurance policy was great, right? I mean, unfortunately, it went up in price every year, kind of like medical insurance, where they have to adjust up because of the pricing. Starting in October, that has all become very, very gray. And the reason is once I kind of alluded to earlier, the Treasury FinCEN guidance in the United States has made it so if this is a sanctioned actor, then you can't pay them without the risk of fines or other sanctions from the Treasury Department. So now it becomes very gray of who you're dealing with. They actually have a list that they update of known sanctioned actors. But your insurance companies now do not want to be involved. They are afraid of the blowback from that. So what you can feel like is a good plan and a good playbook for handling a ransomware event suddenly can be upended whenever you find out that your event happens to be from a sanctioned actor. And so that kind of goes back to the is it going to be covered? What part of it's going to be covered? And that conversation you need to have with your insurance provider, your incident responder, and your recovery specialist to make sure you get all that together.
All right,
Maybe
that's interesting.
You had previously
Karen,
mentioned.
I actually want to, I know this is really interesting, but I want to kind of push on and because we have so much to talk about. So I want to go back to the question we just raised, which is, sorry, Karen, you'll forgive me.
Okay.
So do these people, that's fine. Do these people learn and evolve? Do you see that evolution? What does it look like? And I'll ask the second one after that.
Definitely. And I give you two examples just from last week. I handled a case last weekend that actually the cyber criminals use the method, or one of the most common tactics that we usually use, and this is the well-known tactic that the board didn't approve, which means that the person who communicated with the company, I was not involved in that part, the person actually agreed on some deal, on some price. There was a little bit of ambiguity. Again, one of the things that we try as professional negotiators not to leave, definitely not in crisis event. And when the client started to move towards implementation, there came a note saying, sorry, I'm the boss. This agreement was not approved by me. I actually I cleared the uncertainty and I doubled the amount requested for that particular key. And that tactic saying, you know, I don't have the authority, these are my bosses or the board or the CEO, this is usually a common tactic that we see. So we see today a much more sophistication of cyber criminal in their conduct of negotiations. A good colleague of mine, Boaz Dolev, the CEO of Clear Sky, just found a very interesting
The Israeli government, and I still look up to this person, just so you know. But please go on.
And again, one of the leading cyber intelligence company that discovered amazing thing, and he shared in his publication a transcript of 2 weeks negotiation of the Conti, a daughter group of Aryuk, in their negotiations with a Canadian company. And it's a masterpiece of conduct negotiation. And again, as a professional negotiator, I could definitely identify the point after 5 days that the company actually brought in a professional negotiator rather than the person who negotiated with the Conti group previously. So the answering your question on the audience question, Gadi, definitely this threat actors that actually behave like a structured organizations, they evolve, they learn, they I don't know if they train their people, but
it almost seems like they like you being there, like you are their stakeholder and they want you to be around. Zach, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think if for some reason you do come up on a deadline, whether your executive leadership wants to respond, or you feel at your company that you need to respond to the attackers, I think it's perfectly acceptable and very well known in that attacker community, if you will, to say that we are engaging a professional negotiator, we are engaging professional services, so we will get back to you once they have been brought up to speed. That's very common. They know there is several different negotiations online, like Moty was saying. And if you read through those, they actually talk about having professional negotiators represent your company. And so that's just part of it now. It's just like, like I've said before, they are operating a business from their perspective. And so understanding their business, they want to reduce their risk. They want to protect their public relations, and they want to make sure that they get paid at the end. And they know that a professional negotiator is probably going to help them get paid, and it's going to make it easier.
So Chris, kind of going to you for a second, do you feel, I mean, if somebody came to you today, or maybe they already did this, and said, we want you to work for us instead of these organizations we break into, forget ethical dilemmas for a second, do you think that is something that is good for the organizations in this world to work also for these bad guys to ensure the good remediation of the event?
Yeah. In all the business model is for the bad guys is a fantastic business model. So they try to avoid anything that gives this ransomware stuff a bad reputation. So I had a case where my customer had a HANA in-memory database. It's a very difficult thing, but they professionally shut down the database and then encrypted the server. Mark Seiden was asking, they are not pulling the data out and encrypting it, putting encrypting in situ, and before they encrypt it, they exfiltrate data. So going back, yeah, they want to have a good reputation. They make everything that they can do that the encryption process is reversible. The only cases where we couldn't recover all the data was when the administrators were interfering with the encryption process as it was encrypting the data. Then you end up with an unclear status, and the data is corrupt.
I'm curious. Several of you have mentioned that there's a difference between these different actors, and some are more professional than others. Some are, Moty, even you called them the Ivy League of ransomware. But then, Zachary, you also talked about how there's a sanctioned list. I'm curious, how much do those two things correlate? Like, does becoming a certain amount of professional get you more likely to be on the sanctioned list or less likely to be on it?
So what we see now is a lot of actors outsourcing, engaging third parties to handle different parts of the attack, whether that's the phishing to get into the network, whether it's moving laterally, or in the actual negotiation process, making sure that they have a native speaker for that, whatever language the company is in. So that's really, it's kind of interesting, just like operating a corporation. The more you outsource things, the better you become at your particular product, perhaps. But now you're having to split that payment up between a lot of these different parties. It kind of also becomes more of a security concern. We've also, SolarWinds is a perfect example of something that you have, a lot of companies had in their environment that became a big security issue. We have seen threat actors that have used different third parties for different processes of the attack, and the third party actually collected data that they weren't supposed to. And then the third party, even though the company paid the ransom and believed that the data would not, once they paid the ransom, the data would not hit the internet. It was later some of the data released, and it turned out it was that third party that they had used for some of this process that actually leaked the data.
I think I would like to follow up on the last point that Zachary mentioned. There is a tendency that we see in the last 3-4 months that companies are very reluctant to pay for the second payment. I mean, paying just for the data not to be leaked. And the reason is because unlike a decryption key, a deal for, you pay, you get a decryption key, which is a closed deal, the issue of a promise that you will not publish the data or promise that you will delete the data is a promise which, objectively is very difficult to keep, for the reason that Zaki mentioned, and also for the reason that actually the incentive to resell the data after a year or two, let alone when it goes to these affiliates or the subcontractors or the outsourced criminal group, the incentive is very high. So I think that if we can look strategically or long-term, I think that the Ivy League, which means that the serious threat group that invest a lot in developing the malwares, usually state-backed to some extent, or working closely with states, they will be, in the long run, they will understand that the more they outsource, the less control they have on their affiliates, and they will see less money. And so it's interesting to really develop this type of, it's really interesting to follow this dynamic of whether companies are willing to pay for data. One of the things that I really advise my clients that I work with them on pre-crisis is try to categorize the data in level of sensitivity, because names list, phone numbers, even credit card is no longer a data that is worth paying for. But on the other hand, intellectual property, that could be very, very challenging if it's out there. It's
really interesting as you're talking about this, because it really mimics the lessons that companies that are not doing anything criminal go through. Like a lot of this just are sort of the lessons of, you know, outsourcing any sort of work or dealing with contractors, as Brett pointed out. One of the questions from an audience member named Carl is a reason that we're told not to negotiate or pay ransoms is actually the risk that there's actually no functioning key to decrypt. How often do you see that actually being the case? It doesn't sound like it's come up yet, but so I'm getting the impression from you guys that it's not so common, but you know, how common is it?
Yeah, I find it more, usually it's uncommon. Usually whenever we find that a key doesn't work, the company that was hit has tried to modify the data in some way or tried different keys online that has then either modified the files or something has happened to the files. Now you will have some files that sometimes have issues, but a lot of times it's more about the modifying them, trying to decrypt it themselves or trying to find a free way to do it. Now it also completely depends on the threat actor. It depends on, you know, how their payload is, if your EDR manipulated, things like that. But for the most part, they're pretty good. And now, you know, you see that their encryption standards keep getting higher and higher, where they keep trying to keep from somebody being able to decrypt it.
All right, I wanted to revisit the point of just because I'm just still curious. Is there a correlation between, you know, groups that are showing up on these sanctioned lists and their level of professionalism? You know, does being a more professional ransomware group get you more likely to be on the radar of a government?
I have not revised the full OFAC list, but I can guess that the more they're associated with Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the more resources they have, and therefore the level of sophistication is higher. And you know, it's when we deal with a significant ransom attack, magnitude, scope, usually there are compliance officers, like legal teams that follow, as I think Zachary said earlier, insurance company as well, follow very carefully that you're not facilitating payment to a sanctioned entity. That's also a noise or an interruption that was introduced in October in the market, and it's really interesting how it will evolve. From my understanding, it will intrigue or it will encourage threat actors to attack more sensitive, more critical infrastructure in terms of government sector and private companies. We don't know if it applies or not.
Christoph, so you've just been called into a new situation. What are some of the first things that you hope to see? What are some that will make you think, oh, these are good signs that I can get to a good outcome here?
And the silence ruled the day.
I was like, oh no.
Maybe rephrase that. What would be the best practice you would hope organizations follow so that when you come in, you can actually do your job?
Well, one of the things would be to not start any uncoordinated actions, be it interfering with the encryption process or doing negotiations with an unplanned strategy. The cleanest thing is call someone who has experience in that field and then start with a plan. And the thing I would hope that companies would have would be a plan for that. Everybody has a disaster recovery and business continuity plan, but this dot in the upper right-hand corner with the highest risk and highest impact doesn't exist in these plans. So people should redo that. And one of the most important things is a strategy on who gets restored first, no matter whether it's a decryption process or coming back from the backup. This is awfully slow, so the company has to have a plan in place how to ramp up the business after the incident occurred, because it's going to be chaos and everybody thinks they are the most important ones. So there are quite a few lessons learned that we would like the companies out there to think about and incorporate in their plans before an incident like that happens.
So, Karen, you actually asked a question earlier, which I would like to reemphasize. Essentially, we see that these people are changing on the negotiation side, and they're learning to do this better, and that might be good for us. Zach shared a little bit about them changing their tactics. Moty, Chris, do you see any change of tactics, them reacting to what we do in the defense in the past few months?
Over the last few years, we've seen a lot of change in that. If we go back 5 years, it was encrypting private people's computer and asking for $100. Then they started playing around with mobile devices and smart TVs. We've seen some malware for that as well, but that never really was a market. And then they started with companies, and there were bad parties in that, but there were also very professional groups. And one of the groups that basically drove this market to professionalism was the GandGrab thing. This was a malware as a service, a franchise concept. And the guy running that was keeping a close eye on the professionalism of his franchise partners. And if they didn't behave well, if they weren't responsive, they didn't need to be friendly, but they need to be professional, then he kicked them out. And so that more or less taught them all a lesson how to become a good ransomware player. And part of the aggressors are state-driven organizations like the North Korean ones. That's important for them to get money out of the world, and so they're probably highly trained there.
Moty, what do you think? Have you seen anything? Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask a question that Brett wrote in the chat, which is a great question.
Okay, so before we move to the new question, though, Moty, do you have anything to add to that, though? Evolution?
I have very little understanding on the technological side, but on the human side, I think we exhausted it. They are evolving, they are learning, they are developing. There's not only like a group of hoodies guys, it's a well-structured crime organizations with affiliates, with hierarchy, with rules of the games, not like hundreds of people, but like 10, 20, 30 working in shifts, 24-hour service, choosing their affiliates. It's an industry. It's a ransom industry.
Yeah, and I'll even add to that you see, I mean, I come from a red team background sometimes, or from the past. And so, just in the information gathering step where you might go to a company's website to see what positions they're hiring for, to understand what technologies that you have in that organization, the same thing applies. There's underground forums where people, are saying that this is what skill set we're looking for. We're willing to pay this for this skill set. And it's a great place to look to see how they're trying to mature their ransom product to be able to, facilitate different features or modules or different ways to attack a network.
Moty, you already answered this, but I'll in the chat. But Brett was asking, has the targeting of individuals with ransomware largely gone away with the sort of rise of targeting organizations more successfully?
What I wrote to Brett, that it depends. They are interested in money. Again, you have several tiers of ransomware, and still individuals or definitely SMBs are suffering from ransomware. They're not the most sophisticated. Now, they're not in millions or hundreds of thousands, but 10,000, 20,000 US dollars for a small, medium business is a lot, and definitely high net individuals. But then it's not the classic ransomware, but more of an extortion, that they're using their systems to infiltrate, to take sensitive data, picture, family secrets, personal secrets, and then extort almost as a classic extortion done through digital means.
Do you feel that engaging with attackers makes them a partner of sorts? And do you get any, flack on ethics, or do companies get flack on ethics for this? I can throw this at Nathan, maybe. I'm just picking a likely target by who's smiling.
I lost some audio here.
Oh, well, we'll take care of that with you with behind the scenes with our director. So yeah, the silence is deafening. Are we becoming partners with the criminals in order to maintain? Are they part of our controls list now? What do you think, Zach?
I mean, it's a unfortunate part of the game. I mean, I guess you could say that with a lot of just information security in general, right? A lot of it is red team versus blue team, how to protect the network, because these attacks keep coming. It's unfortunate, but it is just kind of part of the cycle. I do think the Treasury, and FinCEN getting involved is big. They see the problem, they understand the problem. The CISA just released, information where they're trying to help companies mitigate the issue. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of the world we live in. I don't think that people necessarily, especially in the situation, look at us as being something that helps the attackers. We're just, unfortunately, an organization that's needed anymore when dealing with these sophisticated attacks.
It almost feels like we're moving from a place of whatever you would like to call these controls, detective controls, protective controls, preventive controls, whatever controls. We're moving to a place of engaging controls, meaning the attackers are literally who is going to save us. I don't like that at all. But at the same time, I'm trying to stay down to earth. So I would like to frame this in a way where, taking Mark's question here, do you feel that their OPSEC is good? Does following the money work well? I mean, can we do anything to change this balance of terror of ransomware?
It should be a global effort. I think that the public discourse within the field of cybersecurity, ransomware, extortion is still far from being held in a way that terrorism or car accident is being handled. I think that it is number one risk to businesses today, number one risk to public organizations, and it is still not in the public awareness as terrorism, as cancer, as a car accident. And I think that without a global effort to chase the money, to follow the money, not only the security, but to de-incentivize, we will not be able to live in a secure environment. There are car accidents, there are terror attacks, and there will be cybersecurity events. But when you speak with companies, board of directors, CEOs, it still not has been internalized as a significant risk that needs to be handled. And that's the huge gap. This is also why Christoph says that a company needs to prepare, needs to fill, needs to simulate. We are still not there.
So, Chris, going to you directly from this, looking at these attackers, at their OPSEC, do you ever follow up and investigate? Or do you just maintain your negotiations standpoint?
We never disclose that we're a third party in the negotiation process. We try to stay undercover in the company as well. More if it's an internal job, but you never know whether internals are involved. So we try to keep a real good OPSEC. We bring our own infrastructure, everything. We even bring our own coffee maker.
Fair enough. Well, you're a paranoid one. I'll give you that much, and I love you for that. But what are the steps? You want to start engaging with the company. What are the steps when you come in all the way to closing, if you want to engage in such negotiation? Or is it just winging it every time because you're that good?
I mean, for
And
us
that was
personally, yeah, we have honestly detailed flow charts. We try to be as transparent as possible. We do our best to secure our own infrastructure, obviously, but we operate under the understanding that once at one time point in the future, all of our emails, all of our negotiations might be made public, and so we try to be as transparent as we can with the client and with the attacker, so that we understand that we are just there to facilitate the conversation between the attacker and the company. If the company wants to pay, doesn't want to pay, we are just there trying to help out.
Is this becoming more of a thing now where the negotiations are made public? I've seen this happen recently, Moty, in Israel, right? When they published the call, as the chat.
Well, it is one instrument or one tool available to the threat actor in order to to, I would say, encourage the victim to pay, as well as Facebook ad. A Campari company in Italy was attacked, and they changed their Facebook ad to mention the ransom. And sometimes some Russian gangs today are calling to CEO on the mobile devices to encourage them paying the ransom. So publishing the conversation or publishing the negotiation is becoming yet another tool in the overall toolbox of cybercriminals to encourage you to pay.
So take me through this. One of you. I'll repeat this until one of you yields. How do I learn this? Right? What is the basics without your experience? If I go into this situation right now, I start talking to the company, I find out the facts, I start talking to the other side, I close the negotiation at some point. What are the main big steps I have to talk to? And I'll call out each of you in turn, and I'll buy you a beer at some point to apologize later. So Moty, let's start with you. What are my steps to learn this?
It's very easy because it is structured. As Zaki said, there are menus. The first thing you want to do is you want to understand the scope of event. Scope of event in terms of infiltration, how much presence the threat actor has in the system, how much data the threat actor exfiltrated, what were the encrypted files, systems, or data. In parallel to that technological investigation, we start communicate in order to support. Usually within, I would say, 48, 72 hours, we are capable to provide decision maker a very good understanding of the scope of event. Now, having the scope of event, including aspects of legal, regulation, business continuity, PR that are dealt within the 72 hours, I think that this is the time frame, more or less, of big attacks that the board needs to take a decision whether this crisis will go towards paying and recovery, or to go to recovery without paying. It depends on so many variables that we cannot list them here. And it really, the doing this in an effective and efficient way requires a well-put crisis management in structure, that the IT or the technology is only one element in this structure.
All right, Zachary, we'll turn to you now.
Yeah, so, being a more white glove service and working with most of our customers beforehand is what makes the big difference for us. We come into the negotiation with a lot of information. Usually, how their insurance provider is going to react, how their incident response company is going to integrate into the process. And so we have a lot of this information as we start the negotiation. I can't stress enough that you should be doing tabletop exercises with your executive leadership. You might have a great playbook for IT on how you're going to handle the situation, that your executive leadership does not believe that that's how they're going to handle the situation. You'll see everybody from executives that say we don't pay ransoms, and then you're sitting there, you're supposed to be doing the negotiation, the executive saying they're not going to pay this ransom, but at the same time, it's literally the end of the business. They've gotten into their predicament where if they don't pay this ransom, then they are probably going to shut down their organization. So getting all of this done pre the attack, if you will, being able to handle that negotiation, just like we mentioned earlier, you're straightforward with the attacker and you can just feel confident in the way you represent the company, and the company obviously has that transparency of how you are going to operate the negotiation, and it makes a huge difference.
Chris, what is your take on this? And also, I will echo the question from the chat of whether you also bring your own wine cellar.
I think Chris can still not hear Karen, but he can hear the rest of us. I'll echo that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So Karen kind of turned the question to you, but first she wanted to let you know that there is a question from the audience from Mark saying, are you only bringing your coffee maker or also bringing in your wine cellar?
No, the wine cellar stays at home, just the coffee maker. There's a reason for the coffee maker. One company had a smart card vending system, and they gave me a card, and I said, which database am I in now? And it turned out the whole thing was in the domain controller, so my name was in there, so that's why I bring my own coffee.
Fair enough. So what do you say about your process to approaching this and managing the negotiations?
When I am in a situation like that, I always take the police along. I persuade my customer to involve either the police or if it's a case where we have a very, let's say, privacy driven, or the reputation of the company is a very important good, then we take counterintelligence along, because they don't need to go public. The police always needs to go public with the information at some point. So I always negotiate with the police together with the against the attackers. And one point I want to mention is that companies that should prepare for is when an incident like that happens, they usually don't have log files to identify the to protect themselves need to be vamped up, but also let's say forensic readiness should be vamped up, because we lose way too much time trying to find out how the whole thing evolved. It could be, we had cases where they were in the network for half a year till they encrypted.
So one of the things that was mentioned in the chat earlier, that sometimes they would break in and wait for the backups to actually get encrypted before they kind of show their hand.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we've seen definitely people in the network for over 18 months in the network, just sitting there, sitting slowly to make sure that they are they've moved lateral, that they've actually have classified all the data correctly, they've exfiltrated what they wanted. Just going low and slow because they know the payout's going to be much higher.
Yeah,
one of the things
it's
that
very tempting for me to think like, oh, I've got backups. But honestly, if you've got significant access to my main system, they're not particularly better hidden than anything else.
And let's be honest, backups, unless constantly tested, don't often work that well. There is a question from Brett. I love Brett. He says we essentially talked about three. I love models, I love systems. And he takes what we have said here, or you have said here, and breaks it down to three. And this is a good point in time to say we are speaking for ourselves and not our employers again. So there are three camps here. Bring your own coffee maker and embed within the organization, or make yourself known that you're a third party. Which one works better? Which one do you choose, and how? Let's start with you, Moty.
I'm not sure I understand this coffee maker metaphor.
So one of the ideas is
do you identify yourself as a third party, or do you act and present yourself to the ransomware operators as part of the company?
Well, I think this is linked to the next question from Brett. It all depends. It all depends. There's so many variables. Sometimes I'm the son of the owner. Sometimes I'm an external party. Sometimes I'm the CEO. Sometimes I'm the minority shareholders who has some issues with the main shareholder. It all depends on the situation. This is a mind game. And on the other side are human beings, not machines, not robots. despite the fact that today some of the ransom as a service use robots. That's a different interesting story. But I present myself every time in a different way. Man, woman, it depends. It all depends.
So we're closing in on the top of the hour here. And I was wondering if you have, I want to throw this at you. What is the highest number requested and what is the lowest number you managed to get it down to? And is that representative? And I'll start with you, Zach. You are now on, I don't know, on the line, in Shark Tank, in the trenches, something like that. I'm putting pressure on you.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that what the highest number it is, but it's large. It is large, and I'm going to say the discount is usually around 30%. I'll leave it vague like that. How's that sound?
Fair enough. Have there been edge cases?
Yeah, there's always edge cases. You know, there's always some that there's, like Moty mentioned, there's different ways to negotiate the process. I want to be transparent, but there's different ways to handle it. Usually you can get that discount. Usually, you know, it depends though. It depends on what, honestly, the company wants. And kind of like you mentioned earlier, whether to clean up the network after themselves, whether it's to obtain the data that was exfiltrated from the environment, or whether it's just to get that key and call it a day with the key.
Chris, over to you.
The highest number I personally was involved with 15 million was the ransom. And we have the gut feeling, I have no proof of that, but we have the gut feel these guys check public information on the financial situation of the company. And if in Europe, you have to publicize your financial statement as a company, and there's a central server where you can pull that from. And it's always something around a third to half of the cash reserves that the company publicized in the last financial report. They have a vested interest also that the company survives the whole thing. Again, they are trying to be technically clean enough that the company has the data back, and they want the company to, you know, survive the incident. This ransomware stuff is a fantastic business model for them, so they do everything to keep it up and running.
Fair enough. And what is the lowest, what is the percentage you've managed to get off of that? And
between 30 and 50%. So I would agree with Zach, usually around 30%. And we had one incident where I knew that the attackers had stolen a whole batch, around 350 remote logins to customers of a CRM and ERP company. And so the guys were in stress, and they had to, 350 victims at their hands. So I got it down to a tenth because I was playing dumb, and the guy on the other side just despaired over me and just gave me all the decryptors. Said, "Here, have fun, go away."
Okay, over to you, Moty, and then we'll have our final question.
It's from 32 million, not paying anything, just gaining time for 3 weeks until full recovery. To something last week, there was 1.5 million, and the threat actor, for the first time I saw it, used a take it or leave it method. The company decided not to pay. So, it's the very, as a crisis negotiator, as a hostage negotiator, I teach myself a lesson every time and time. Every incident stands on its own, and you need to address it coming tabula rasa, identifying, understanding, analyze, profile the threat actor, and don't make the mistake of, oh, I dealt with that group a month ago, and etc. etc. No.
All right. I think to finish up, we'll do one more question, and I'll give this to each of you. I'm curious, what do you personally anticipate, if you have to guess, what the future techniques you're going to see in this field are? And we can go first to you, Zachary.
Honestly, payment. I started to see payment plans, and maybe API access to different payment providers, so that way they can reduce a lot of the work they have, especially on the smash and grab and the quick stuff, where you've been ransomed. Here's where you pay, and once it pays, it's all automatic, and it's all just APIs that run in the back end.
Ransomware as a service.
it's already there. So it's just the next logical step. Get those payment plans out there, then they can make money on the financing as well.
Right. Chris, do you agree? Do you have a different take?
Yeah, absolutely. These guys learned to become more and more professional, and the automation at the back end is absolutely there. We had access to one back end, so we have seen that they are doing a really professional job at the other side.
I will just quickly say that I really like what Brett just said. Installment payments, installment decryption.
Yeah, Brett, you are invited to the next panel on this. If you,
Moty.
What are you seeing as
I would say two patterns that we see. One is automation, but not only of the payment, but also of the dialogue, and the whole process will be automated in order to scale it up. And the second, which is a much more worrying development, is really aiming at life-threatening systems, which means not putting business at risk, but putting life at risk. And I think that we should be very, very aware of. Desalination plants, hospitals in a much more severe, and other, food industry, agriculture industry. These are things that if you say that the threat is not disruption of business, but the threat is that your whole system will be poisoned or something like this, that is something that will open the wallets very quickly.
Fair enough. Well, we're wrapping up. I do feel, though, that there are three aspects to this that interest me. One of them is technical. We can see evolution, and that incident response people can look at on their own with information sharing, although I don't think that's happening too much around ransomware like in other things. The second is how the organization gets prepared. And there's the basics, which have been mentioned. Like in incident response, you have to have somebody in charge. You have to have tabletop exercise. You have to understand what's going on and why. And that's important. And then there is the negotiation itself, which we apparently need an expert to do. And I keep thinking about ethics. I have no doubt in my mind now that the negotiator is necessary, because you don't want to be left hanging and not play the game in the way that will best serve your business, especially when law enforcement can't give you an answer. With that said, I'm also thinking about what kind of tools for management, for the board, can be created and used in order to facilitate this discussion. If we stopped treating this as unethical by some people who have never handled ransomware, saying you can't talk to the attackers, which I would like to agree with, but I can't, maybe we could actually share some information and create some models around making that decision. Moty, Chris, and Zach, you're awesome. And if anybody wants help with this kind of situation, if you want to talk to Moty at Nest, to Zach at his various hats, which he will share in the chat in a minute, or with Christoph at BFK, you know where to find them. I truly appreciate you coming to talk to us today. I wish we were 10 years from now, where we understood whether engaging with the attackers in order to survive is good or bad, and how to do it best. But one thing I'm sure of, being in your shoes is one of the most interesting things I can think of. Maybe other than something political for the last couple of days, which I don't want to talk about right now. So, which I think is smart. With that, we have shifted. We're now doing more streaming. So follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, because we're slowly shifting out of Zoom. Thank you all for getting in and talking to us. Thank you for listening. And with that, we'll keep talking to our panelists, but we're finishing the show. That's a wrap. Thank you.